Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm Tom Landy. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture. And the McFarland Center sponsors lectures, conferences, programs, other special events that impact questions of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation on campus. You can find all of our programs online at holycross.edu/McFarland Center, including today's talk. So it'll be so good, you'll want to go back and tell your friends to watch it, and that will be online in a couple of days. One of the McFarland Center's major initiatives, Catholics and Cultures, explores Catholic life and practice around the globe. I'm happy to point out that our website, catholicsandcultures.org, will cross a great threshold this week. We're just on the cusp of 1 million page views, which excites me, about half of those in the last year. So we've been around for about 4 years, and it keeps growing so far at a mathematically exponential rate. I don't know how far that can keep going. I'm happy about that. And we have a scholarly journal we launched a year and a half ago called the Journal of Global Catholicism, and that's about to pass 5,000 page downloads, which is pretty good for a scholarly journal. So I'm happy about both of those things. Among the 25 or so countries featured on the site so far, I've had the pleasure to make a few visits to China with a good friend and to document religious life there, around Shanghai, in rural areas of Hubei, outside Beijing, in minority villages in southwest Yunnan province. The state of Christianity in China is often difficult for outsiders to comprehend. In terms of sheer numbers, Christianity is flourishing to a degree that no one could have imagined 10, 15, 20, certainly 20 years ago, despite a turbulent history of religious suppression and persecution. And even today, there are continued stories of church closings and persecution that go on. Despite all that, some predict that China may have the world's largest population of Christians by the year 2030. So how is that possible? I'm grateful today to have America's foremost authority on Christianity in China explore this with us. Fenggang Yang is professor of sociology and founding director of the Center for Religion and Chinese Society at Purdue University. His research focuses on the sociology of religion, religious change in China, and on immigrant religion in the United States. Professor Yang's newest book, which is due out very soon, which I had hoped he might bring, he hoped he might bring it, I hope we'd have it for today, but is a really interesting book. It's Brill's Atlas of Religion in China, Social and Geographical Context. And it really breaks down, from what I understand, to look at China from local perspectives. And I think that's going to be a tremendous contribution. He's author of Religion in China, Survival and Revival Under Communist Rule, and Chinese Christians in America, Conversion, Assimilation, and Adhesive Identities. He's co-edited more than 10 books, and he is founding editor of the Review of Religion in Chinese Society. Professor Yang was elected and served as president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, and currently serves as the first president of the East Asian Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. His media interviews have appeared on NPR, The New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Time, The Economist, CNN, and BBC. He's here with his wife, Joanne. Pleased to have her here and introduce her. And his talk today is one of the Deichmann family lectures on religion and modernity. We're grateful to John Deichmann and his family who've made it possible for us to do that. So please join me in welcoming Fenggang Yang.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for the very generous introduction. Thank you for the invitation and for making this possible. And thank you all for being here to hear me talking about the Christian growth in China. I allude this to the new Roman Empire idea. Is about 4 years ago when I visited Italy in Milan. I met a professor, and when I talked with him, he studies the ancient Roman Empire, and the first thing he said to me is, I think China is the new Roman Empire. The U.S. is not. Thinking about Christianity grow out of a pagan environment, that's more like China today, rather than the U.S. The U.S. started with the Puritans and immigrants from Europe who were already Christian. So this is the idea, starting from there. And when we decided to about the topic, we didn't know what would happen in the coming weeks. And just 4 weeks ago, there's the agreement between Vatican and China. Right? That's kind of a breakthrough finally China and Vatican reached certain agreement, even though nobody knows what's in the agreement. It's not public. But we do know this last week, two bishops from China went to Rome for the bishops' conference, bishops' synod, and two bishops from China for the first time were able to travel formally, openly, rather than doing anything underground. And these two bishops, it happens to be one from Chengde, Hebei province. That's my province. I'm from Hebei province. There are many Catholics in Hebei province. Perhaps a quarter of all Catholics reside in Hebei province. And the other bishop is from Shanbei, Shanxi province. Used to be Yan'an diocese. Now they want it to be Yulin diocese. He happened to be someone who went to the Catholic University of America to study sociology. And I got my PhD in sociology from the Catholic University of America. So we know each other. So it's really interesting to see things happening between China and the Vatican and the churches in China and some of the people that I really know in person. So it's a very interesting thing, very interesting development. Now today, on this topic, for those who know about Chinese Christianity, the history of it, the history can trace back a very long time ago, but we will not focus on that. We start with the continuous presence for this time. That's when Matteo Ricci and another Jesuit who went to China in the late 16th century and made a successful mission. And Matteo Ricci is a very famous scholar in China. They are highly respected. And he managed to get to China, go to the mainland, and traveled northward, eventually walked into Beijing and met with the Ming Emperor. And he was allowed to stay in the capital. And eventually, he died in Beijing, buried in Beijing. What's interesting is his tomb is in the cemetery is in the Communist Party School of Beijing City. So if you want to visit this Matteo Ricci's tomb, you have to pass the gate of the party school, the Communist Party School. And actually, it is a site many people would make a visit. And now we have a Jesuit Pope. It's meaningful. I'll see more about that. Then the Protestant presence starts about 200 years ago. And without talking too much about before the PRC period, the People's Republic of China, that's established in 1949 by the Chinese Communist Party. And quickly, around that time, when the communists took power in mainland China, not including Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan, and there were about 3 million Catholics. Give or take 300,000. Because some scholars say there were 3.3 million. The Chinese Communist Party said, there were only 2.7 million Catholics. There are some disagreement. And the Protestants is about 1 million. In other words, the Christians around 1950 in China, every 3 Catholics, there would be 1 Protestant. Now what happened in China? For the first 30 years, there were suppression and eradication of religion. The first 15 years, there's increased suppression of all religions, not just Christianity, but also Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, or folk religion. Then in 1966, when the Cultural Revolution started, all religious sites were closed down. It's eradication. There was no single church, temple, or mosque open for religious service for the Chinese for 13 years. From 1966 to 1979, all were closed down. But starting in 1979, when the new regime, Deng Xiaoping, the new leader, under the new leadership, he changed the direction of the party from political struggles to economic development. Then he says, yeah, we could allow religions to reopen their sites. And since 1979, the policy overall, I call it toleration with restrictions. There's greater tolerance of religion since 1979. But there are always restrictions. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes restrictions are not enforced, but they are always there. Now, and also some historians who have studied China find that about 500,000 Christians really died of unnatural death, meaning it could be imprisoned, tortured, and maybe starved to death in the 1980s, 1960s. 500,000 disappeared. Even though that's so many people died, but the number of Catholics from 1950 to 1980 stayed about the same. It started with 3 million in 1950, and by 1980, around that time, when the Chinese Communist Party released a document called the document number 19 of 1982, that is a very important document that set the new tone or the basis for the religious policy, the toleration with restriction policy. That has been in place since then, since 1982. And in that document, it says there were 3 million Catholics now. In other words, even though there was no church open for 13 years, the number of Catholics remained about the same. And then, since then, there's a gradual increase. By 2010, there are different counts. And the Chinese government said in 2010 there were 5.3 million Catholics. It's an increase from 3 million. But a Catholic Institute of Holy Spirit in Hong Kong, they studied carefully, examining each diocese, and found that there may be about 12 million Catholics. So more than 2 times more. It's more than 2 times of the government number. Then there are others who say there are some international missionary organizations who monitor churches in China closely. They said, well, actually, there could be as many as 20 million Catholics in China. Then the Pew Research Center in 2011 released a report of global Christianity. It says, well, let's do a conservative estimate based on the information we know, based on surveys and also some regional studies, case studies. They came up with the number of 9 million Catholics in China in 2010. All right? The Protestant start with 1 million or less than 1 million. It reached 3 million, the same number as Catholics in 1980. From there, the growth picked up. In 1990, there are 4.5 million Protestants. In 2000, 10 million. In 2010, 23 million. These are official numbers from the Chinese government. The latest from the Chinese government is that 38 million Protestants. This is in the white paper on religion that was released in April this year. It's somewhere 38 million, almost 40 million Protestants, but these numbers are only those adult Protestants attending officially approved churches. And those who are not baptized, who are under 18, or who attend non-approved churches, that's what we usually call house churches, are not included in the government number. And outside estimates, outside China, there are, again, the international missionary organizations often say there are at least 80 million Protestants in 2010. And Catholics, Protestants together, there should be more than 100 million Christians in China. And there is the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at the Golden Commonwealth that published the Atlas of Global Christianity. And the last one was published in 2009 that had that number. There is a very influential book called Operation World. It's very popular among evangelical Christians that also have the number of 100 million Christians in China. There are several other ones. Even some internal conversations or talks by high officials of China might have said there were more than 100 million Christians in China. That's Christianity Today, the magazine that's popular among Protestant Christians based in the Chicago area. They had a report in 2008 said the director of the Religious Affairs Bureau in China, Mr. Ye Xiaowen, said in some internal conversations, internal conference meetings, said there were more than 130 million Christians. That's a big threat to them. All right, so these are different numbers. But scholars tend to be conservative. We tend to say, you have to be able to verify. The scholars' their estimate, start with 1980 with 3 million. That's perhaps pretty close to the reality. But by 1990, there were 20 million, rather than only 3.5 million Protestants. And by the year 2000, there should be over 50 million instead of 10 million as the government counted. In other words, most Protestants do not belong to the official church, the so-called three self churches. Most of the people attend house churches. That's probably true, even though you may not hear different stories, especially from those scholars mostly aligned with the government positions. Again, the Pew Research Center's report in 2011 said in 2010 in China, probably, conservative estimate, there would be 58 million Protestants plus 9 million Catholics. That's a conservative estimate. And totally together, that would be 5% of the Chinese population. 5%. It's still small. Right? It's not a majority. It's a very small minority. But what's interesting is, if 58 million is a solid estimate, if we take that number, we can see the growth in the last 30 years, from 1980 to 2010. The annual average growth rate, and its accumulated compound growth rate, is more than 10%. Annual, what does that mean? It means every 100 Christians this year, you would find 10 new believers within this year. Next year, you would have 110. Then you would find another 11 to add to the flock, right? And so that's the 10% annual growth. If we take the earlier years, earlier 3 decades into account, the growth rate is 7%. It's modest. Most people will say, yeah, actually, the churches have been growing much faster than this. But there are years that are not growing. There are churches that don't grow that fast. On average, this is the situation. And we did a big survey in 2007, and those estimates are from mostly church sources or government census. And then we try to do social surveys to find out whether we can get close to the numbers that we get from other sources. And with more than 7,000 cases in the survey, we estimated that there were 3.2% of people openly admit that they are Christian. The surveys, you respond to strangers. Would you tell a stranger what you believe? Well, in the U.S., of course, everyone is, most people are very open about their faith. But this is not the case in China. If you were a Christian, there could be negative consequences in the public if you admit that. So not everyone openly admit to be Christian if they are Christian. So there's at least 3.2% openly Christian. Then there are people, we also ask many other questions. One of the questions is, there are a set of things. There are Guan Yin, Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Jesus. Do you believe in Jesus? Right? That's another way to get people. Right? And we find there are 2.7%, additional 2.7% admit that they believe in Jesus. In China, when you say you believe in Jesus, actually I think the wording is Jesus Christ. That's pretty specific. It's unlike in this culture, right? Everyone knows about Jesus Christ. But in China, it's not in the textbook. It's not in their daily conversation. If you admit that you know about Jesus Christ, that may be a hint that you are somehow close to Christianity. There are also those people who said, I don't believe in Jesus Christ. I'm not a Christian, but I sometimes read the Bible, go to the church, even pray to God. Are they Christian? Together, these three types of people, there are adding together is 7%, 7.1% in the survey. So when the Pew Research estimate is only 5% are Christian in China, we know it's a conservative estimate. Probably it's very hard to say there are fewer than 5% of Christians in China today. There are different ways to get this. Self-identified Christians, 33.5 million. Self-identified plus those who believe in the existence of Jesus Christ is 61.8 million. Then if you add those who have some Christian practice, the number increased to 74.5 million. Then if you just say, do you believe in 上帝? Well, for those know Chinese, that's, even though 上帝, the word, it means God or supreme God. This word came from ancient Chinese classics. But nowadays, if you say 上帝, most likely you are referring to the Christian understanding of God. We did not have the word 天主 in the survey. That's a big mistake. We realized there may be Catholics who don't say 上帝, but they would say 天主. That's the Catholic way of saying God. But together, there are 85 million people say, yeah, I believe in God. Now, about the growth in the coming years, it depends on what have happened in the last almost 70 years. What are the social factors or spiritual factors for the Christian growth in China? This is a very remarkable growth very rapid growth. It has not happened that often in the world or in human history. Occasionally you hear rapid growth here or there. For example, in the 1960s to the 1990s, Christianity grew very fast in South Korea. From about 5% reached totally, Catholics, Protestants together, nowadays about 30% of the population. And the growth happened in 3 decades, 1960s to the 1990s. In ancient Roman Empire, Christianity grew perhaps especially remarkably in the 4th century, 3rd and 4th century. Before that, there are very obscure small minorities in the empire. Believers would say it's all by God's power, whether you grow or not. As a sociologist, we look at the social factors for the growth. What have happened in China? I think there are major social processes, large-scale changes in China, the market transition since 1978, urbanization. I grew up in a village. When I grew up in China, more than 80% of the people are in the rural areas. Nowadays, about 50% are in the urban areas already. The percentage does not really, may not make you realize how large the scale is. It's the entire U.S. population moved from rural to urban within 2 decades. That's the scale. In China, there are 300 to 500 million people became urban residents in the last 30 years or so. Huge change. Villages are torn down, become high-rise apartment buildings. And we know the high-speed rail built, and many of the places they go through villages, the villages disappear. Now it's all become urban places. And so urbanization, migration, there are at least 200 million to 300 million are called a floating population. That is, they go to the coastal provinces to find jobs, but they return home for the Spring Festival, the Chinese New Year. 200 million to 300 million traveling back and forth every year. And then many also simply settle in the urban areas. Family structure changed. I have 5 brothers, so 6 siblings. That's my generation. I'm the 5th one, so I have 4 older brothers. But the younger one, only 1 child or 2 children. Family structure changed dramatically within our generation. And now we have done some surveys of Chinese students recently in the US. We find more than 80% of the students from China don't have a sibling. It's very different. I know what a sibling is, right? But no sibling. That's the change. Our community structure changed. I grew up in a commune. In the rural areas, it was commune. And in the urban areas, it's the work unit. Like you belong to the work unit. From birth to death, everything was taken care of. But now it's not. It's market economy. You find a job, it's separate from everything else. So it's a community structure changed. China is very well connected with the world. There are many foreigners work in China. And another factor is the social enemy. If you visit China, you would hear people talking about all the moral issues, moral problems, crises. There are many incidences, often in the news or social media, talk about those terrible things happening, like old people walking across the street and fell. Nobody dare to rescue, to help, because the helper can be sued and pay fines. There are a lot of similar kind of moral issues in society. All these factors, all this, I think, are in favor of Christian growth. Christianity is a response to the changes and to the problems in Chinese society. Many Chinese are open to the Christian message because of the social structural changes and also the facing the moral crisis in society. Other factors for Christian growth. In the early history, the history of early church in the Roman Empire, there were some plagues, the epidemic. And after every epidemic, the proportion of Christians becomes higher because Christians take care of each other, and the death rate during those plagues is much lower than the pagans. Anyway, so this really, when those natural disasters happen, actually, it's often the church becomes stronger. And that's somehow is the case in China too. In 2003, there was the Sars. How many of you remember Sars? Okay. It was very scary. But what's interesting, yeah, that's a epidemic, is contamination, how do you say that? It's just the disease is spread very fast. It's better not to be interacting with people, not in contact with anyone, in order to be away from the virus or bacteria. What's interesting is, around 2003, many so-called house churches in the urban areas, they used to be small family gatherings, and suddenly they become large congregations. And these are the so-called house churches today in China, with like several dozens or several hundred people gather on Sunday for worship service, but they still call themselves house churches. And they become public in several cities in 2003 or 2004 or 2005, around those few years. Then in 2008, there was the Sichuan earthquake, huge. The magnitude is more than 8.2 or something. It's devastating. What's interesting is, in Sichuan province, there are many Christians, and of course others too, poured in service to help the disaster relief. And many Christians went there to do their work. There's the political factors affecting the continuous growth of Christianity in China. That is, if you have a policy that maintain the current level of control or restriction, or you increase the suppression, more persecution, more like the Cultural Revolution or before, or another thing could happen is China, the government can change. The Communist Party could collapse. Who knows? That's another possibility we can entertain, even though that's very less likely to happen. The Chinese Communist Party is very strong in China. But, thinking about possibilities. With these three possibilities, or more likely the more restriction and persecution, these two possibilities, we can see what would happen in the coming decades in China, assuming the major social processes don't change much. There's still continuous urbanization, migration, and the family structure is not easy to change. With all that, we can do some projection to look at what could happen in the coming decades. If we follow the 10% growth rate that has happened since 1980, or we use a lower rate that's kind of from 1950 to 2010. And that includes some years very intense suppression, even eradication. No one can publicly gather for worship service, even include that. that would be on average, there's still 7% growth each year. So from 2010 to 2050, this is the growth potential. The 10% growth is simply too fast. By 2040, every Chinese would become Christian. I think that's simply beyond imagination. And so we can take that off from the table. By 7%, yeah, you know, this is more modest. There are intense suppression sometimes, or some areas. With 7% increase, Protestants alone, by 2020, there would be more than 140 million. By 2030, it could be 16% of the Chinese population become Christian. 2040, if the growth continues, it would reach 33%. 2050, 2/3 of the population. I think this is simply beyond imagination. When I first did this projection, I did not believe it. It took a very long time. I asked around, asked many people. Eventually I said, you know, I cannot deny this. If the growth continues, if people still evangelize, if the social processes still, that what are in place will continue to be in place, this would be the situation. In the US, there are about 150 million Protestants, and China could catch that number in around 2020 or 2022. And all Christians in the US, Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians together, is about 225 million in 2014, according to the Pew Research Center. You know, Protestants alone in China could reach that number by 2030. It's only 12 years from now. And there are also the Catholics. The Catholics, of course, they have continued to grow. Even though, we start with 9 million, the conservative estimate, and with the lower rate that's by the government numbers for the year 1980, and starting from 1950, and the growth is 1.9%. It's still increase, and up to 18 million in 2050. We can see this way. In 2020, there could be 10 to 13 million Catholics. In 2030, there would be 13 to 18 million Catholics by these two growth possibilities. And so if you add Catholics to the number of Protestants, there's almost no doubt by 2030, there will be more Christians in China than in the US. This is what happened in the ancient Roman Empire. Rodney Stark is a sociologist of religion. He has this famous book on the rise of Christianity, and he did a calculation based on all available materials. He found that the growth is very much followed an annual rate of 3.4%. And by starting with the year 40, and up to 350, that's the growth of the numbers in the second column, or in proportion of the population. And also, for those who know the history, the Roman Empire has had persecutions all along. But in 2003, there was the great persecution. It's the emperors had the edict. Says, all empire-wide, we need to get rid of Christians, right? But by then, it's only perhaps around 10% of the population or less are Christian. It's already too late. The great persecution in the Roman Empire only lasted for 10 years. By 313, the Edict of Milan, Emperor Constantine said, let's stop. There's no way we can get rid of Christians. So he changed the policy and allowed freedom for Christians. And So here, as a sociologist, if something happened once, there may be a pattern that could be repeated, right? So I wonder whether 5 to 10% in an empire could be the critical threshold. If it's less, you can still get rid of them. But if it's passing 5% or 10%, it's simply very hard to eradicate Christianity in the society. This is different from a small country. Empire means there are diversity, cultural diversity, regional differences. When some Christians suffer in one province, they can escape to another province. So it simply makes the uniform policy imposed in the whole empire very unlikely. This is the map of the Roman Empire in the beginning of the 4th century. Only in Asia Minor, perhaps, there are majority Christian in that local area. Some part of Africa, but in the vast land or the coastlines, not many Christians. It's not so easy to find that many Christians. But that's the beginning of dramatic change happened. Constantine even had to convert to Christianity, the emperor. China, this is the map we made. Protestant churches, they are scattered all around. Actually, only one province we did not have a record of a Protestant church. That's the Tibetan Autonomous Region, even though there are actually Protestant churches in Tibet too. But based on data, we don't have that here. But otherwise, you can see it's scattered around. And this is a map of all 5 religions that the Chinese government recognizes. The yellow is the Buddhist temples, that they are the largest number in the county, the predominant religion. And the pink counties where the Catholic Church is number 1, the largest number of religious sites are Catholic churches. And then there are Taoist, the blue, and the Islamic mosques are the green, and then the Protestant churches are the red. You can see in many counties, the Protestant church has already become the largest number of all religious sites. In some counties, the Catholic Church is the largest number. Another thing, in the Roman Empire, the Romans built those roads, highways at that time. It's mostly for military purposes. And secondly, it's for commercial, for trade. But Christians use those roads to spread Christianity fast. Right? And what's going on in China? This is from official map. It's in 2016, the high-speed rail. How many of you have taken high-speed train? Okay, that's very good. It's really fast. In the past, from Beijing to Shanghai takes more than 10 hours. It's a whole night or more than that. Now it's what, 4 hours? It's just make travel so easy throughout China. There are also those highways, those paved ways. These are only railroads. And those are the things, technical, economic development that makes it impossible to stop the Christian growth. Christians will use this technology for evangelism. Now, what's the current situation overall? Well, there have been great revivals in the last several decades, 4 decades. In many areas, suddenly there are new churches, new gatherings. But at the same time, there have been great persecutions. Yeah, people still can be imprisoned because of faith. Yes, it still happens. Even though it's not, there are many prisoners in China. They are imprisoned for, they would say, they have some economic crime. But there are one case, for example, in 2003, there was a very famous case in Beijing, a pastor who was sentenced for several years. I don't remember exact how many years, but his crime was running a non-approved business. But his business was distributing the Bible. He printed some Christian books and distributed that. It was not for profit, but he was sentenced for economic crime. So there are similar cases. So persecution still happens, and also some people may lose their jobs if they are known as Christian, especially if you work in the government, and if you are a professor, university professor. Actually, nowadays, there are many professors who are Christian in China. They are known. But sometimes, if you have a personal enemy, or your supervisor does not like you, the Christian faith can be the reason to get you. So like in Fujian province, there are several cases of university professors lost jobs because of the Christian faith. Recently, there are campaigns in Zhejiang province, and all high school, middle school, elementary school teachers have to fill out a form to declare your faith. If you are Christian, there's a possibility that you may lose your job. So great persecution, and also in spite of those persecutions and restrictions, Christianity has continued to grow. And not only grow in China, there are some Christians in China are ambitious. They said, we have been the receivers of missions, of evangelism. Now we need to take the baton and carry on evangelistic missions to the other parts of the world. So there is a movement called 2030. A few house church leaders started this movement. They said, by the year 2030, we want to send out 20,000 Chinese missionaries to do cross-cultural missions. Many already in Central Asia, working, or in Southeast Asia, or in Africa. So this movement already started. In Zhejiang province, a few years ago, there was a big campaign. The party secretary of Zhejiang province just simply hated the cross. He did not like the cross. He saw so many crosses in Zhejiang province, two shiny red, very big. He said, is this the communist world or the world of the cross? He started this campaign to take down all crosses on church rooftops. And there were several thousand churches in Zhejiang province. And after 2.5 years, about a third of all churches, their crosses are taken down. And many people hurt during the process because many Christians try to protect the crosses, and a few were jailed for their actions. But this is in Zhejiang, is the south of Shanghai, if you want to know where these are. South of Shanghai, that province, there are many churches nowadays. This is Wenzhou, that's a very well-known area with a lot of Christian churches. And Christian churches, in Wenzhou, in Zhejiang province, Fujian province, Jiangsu province, Anhui, Henan, those areas have higher number of churches. But also many in northeastern China, some in Yunnan province, that's you visited. This is one way to show that. And this is called Back to Jerusalem movement. They want to carry the good news, the gospel, back to Jerusalem. And once they complete that, the world ends. Yes, or Uyghurs or Muslims. The mission started in the 1940s, and they began travel westward. This immigrant evangelism, that the church would commission like a few families. You move westward, as Western as possible, settle there, evangelize, and then plant churches, move on. And a group of them moved from the coastal areas to Xinjiang and settled there. That's why there are churches there. And then, 1949, they could not move further west. They stopped. Many people settled in those areas. This line is interesting, this is from Google Globe. And looking, there are movements from coastal areas of China to Xinjiang to Jerusalem. What happens if Pope Francis going the other way, and if he walks to Beijing? What will happen to the world? I think it's hard to imagine, but exciting to think about that possibility. Washington Post had an article report about the Chinese ambitions of building railroads. Actually, this actual train from eastern of China and went to Madrid, the longest train journey in the world. It actually happened already. And iPhones are made in China, right? You know that. We often, if you order, it ships from China. If with this train, it saves a lot of money for the company. It can lower the price significantly because by flight, it still costs more than by taking train. And that they can distribute this in many European countries. And China had this ambition of so-called One Belt, One Road initiative. Want to link with Africa and Europe. I don't want to get into that too much, and I want to finish quickly. And interestingly, no matter if this is for military consideration, for economic consideration, no matter, Christians consider this as opportunities of evangelism. There are already Chinese Christian churches and organizations in many parts of the world, not by people from the PRC, but by the Chinese who have been spread all around the world in the last century or so. Very much like the Jews were scattered in the Roman Empire. And think about the early churches. Where are the early churches? They often, the apostles went to those Jewish communities in diaspora. From there, they established churches. And China is really increasing the capacity physically, materially. And China now is the country that prints the most Bible. Only in 1987, the first copy of the Bible was printed in China. Only, 87, that's 30 years ago. In 1989, October, 1 million copies were printed. In 95, in July, 10 million copies. This is a celebration of 10 million copies of the Bible printed. 2007, end of 2007, 50 million printed. 2012, 100 million printed. And the latest that I could find was in July of 2016, 150 million Bibles printed in China. There's a great need for the Bible in China. Many people want a copy, even if they are not Christian or a Christian yet. So with all the capacity ready for evangelism. So I'm wrapping up. Napoleon once said this, let China sleep. Don't make it a week. When China wakes up, the world will shake. If as consumers, we know the economic impact of China's awakening, right? I think nowadays it's not so easy to totally avoid made in China stuff. But is this really the economic awakening that would shake the world? Or is that the political awakening now has the challenge today the U.S. face with China? The Chinese model or the U.S. model, the Washington consensus or Shanghai consensus, that already the world has felt the challenge China posed. But that's from the official side. The economic and the political are all from the Communist Party state. How about the people? Christianity is not something the Chinese government supports. To the contrary, the Chinese government tries to suppress Christianity. But if the growth continues, as I projected, it will shake the world. So, it's really, I feel we are lucky to live in this era. Watching what's happening is like a big book unfolding, opening, and watching the changes. I have been documenting all the changes of religions in China, not only Christianity, but also watching other religions. So this is the latest book, The Atlas of Religion, with all the 5 religions documented. In addition to the 5 religions, we also talk about a folk religion and those forbidden religion, the black market, and also the red market, the officially approved religion, and also many in the gray market of religion. So it's an exciting time to do research on religion in China. I have been really feel this great opportunity for scholars. Thank you. Sure, yeah.
Questions? Karen?
Thank you very much. I just have several questions, but persecution is not new in China. Established religion was persecuted in traditional China because religion was considered a source of rebellion, so that goes way back in time. Also, from what I know, people don't always make a distinction when they declare themselves part of a religious organization. They practice Buddhism or Taoism in their lives, and so when you ask people if they believe in Jesus, does that mean they won't have a Buddhist priest at their funeral, or they won't believe in Taoism at some point in their lives? Because that's the characteristic of Chinese religion. It always has been, and I'm wondering if that's still the case.
So that's 2 questions about the authorities. Traditional China, the imperial China always worry about different religions and try to suppress. So it's not new. That's true. But the communist China is somewhat different because it's openly declared this is atheist ideology as the official orthodox ideology. If you are a Communist Party member, you have to declare to be atheist. For some years, the rule was not enforced, so lapsed. But in the last 5 years, since Xi Jinping, there's a clear rule: you have to declare to be atheist, otherwise you can be, lose your position, lose your party membership. So this is somewhat different from previous dynasties in China. So there's ideology struggle in it. About the Chinese religiosity, Chinese traditional way of being religious. Yeah, very few Chinese in old China would have a exclusive religious identity. I'm Buddhist, so I only go to Buddhist temples, very rare. Only those dedicated, if you become monks or nuns, perhaps you are more exclusive in your religious identity or belonging. Most people, they don't care that much. They would go to different temples for different needs. But I would say that's a pre-modern pattern of being religious. Increasingly, if you ask Chinese Christians, especially Protestants, Chinese Protestants tend to be conservative in theology. They make a strong point that we are Christian, I don't do all the other religious things. Even ancestor worship It's a big controversy the Chinese church face. Once you become a convert, and can you still kneel down in front of your parents' ancestors? That's a big thing. The churches keep talking about it. It's a struggle. Some pastors trying to say, perhaps it's not worship, it's a veneration of ancestors. It's not religious, but more cultural. That's a material Ricci approach. Says when you do rituals at the Confucius temples, you are not worshiping Confucius, but you are venerating, showing your respect. But we know what happened to that teaching, right? When the Pope said you cannot do this, then the Chinese emperor said, if you do not allow Catholics in China to do this, then you should leave, right? So after many years of struggles, nowadays, Christians tend to emphasize exclusive identity. They try hard to get rid of other practices. But this is not only Christians. It has happened to Buddhists too. In Buddhism, there's called 正信佛教 movement. Orthodox Buddhist faith, they try to get rid of folk religion, especially ancestor worship part. And this has been a campaign since the 1930s, 1940s, but especially in Taiwan, especially the Fagushan tradition in Taiwan. They clearly said, if you are Buddhist, you should be Buddhist. You should not do the folk religious things, ancestor worship. So I see this is not as a one religion thing or Western religion thing. It's a modern thing. If you do not distinguish your own religion, why would people come to you, right? So it's an organizational understanding. It's better to be differentiated from others in order to be able to have a market share. So, but when we estimate the number of Christians, we have to take this into consideration. Most people actually they may say, I'm Buddhist, but I'm not religious. I'm Buddhist, I'm atheist. You will see people do see that. But, we have to use multiple measures to say, even though 7% of people have either some beliefs or practice, we say, let's count as 5% instead of 7%. Okay, thank you.
When I saw the chart of the growth in the Protestant churches, I assumed that most of them are evangelical. Why do you think the evangelical movement has grown so much quicker than Roman Catholic?
Yes, that's a very good question. First of all, the Chinese evangelicals are not necessarily the same as American evangelicals, right? So the common thing is that they emphasize evangelism. As long as you're a Christian, you have to evangelize. That's the Great Commission. If you become Christian, so that's really the Protestant idea. It starts with Martin Luther, right? Everyone is a priest. Not only the priest, but every believer is a priest. So you are obligated to evangelize. In China, this broad evangelical category would include Pentecostals, Charismatics, and Reformed theology, Presbyterianism. Actually, the Reformed tradition in China has become a main trend, popular in the urban house churches in recent years. They are very strongly anti-Pentecostal charismatic type. Anyway, so overall, the Protestants, I think there are several factors for their faster growth than the Catholic. First is the suppression on Catholic Church is much severe than the Protestant. Why? Because the Catholic hierarchy is so similar to the communist hierarchy. It's direct power challenge. And also the Catholics are loyal to the Pope, who resides in the Vatican. The Holy See is another state. is loyal to another state. And the Communist Party wants all Chinese citizens express their loyalty to China, to the Communist Party. The Protestants, they don't have a foreign state to express their loyalty. They can cut off their ties with all foreign bodies, but they are still can be considered good Protestants. But it's hard to be a Catholic that way. So there's a greater suppression on the Catholic Church. Actually, for many years, to become a bishop in the Catholic Church is not really a good thing, because at the moment of becoming bishop, you could be missing. You could, nobody can find you anymore. No official sentence, but the punishment is severe. So there's organizational reason for the less growth. When you are suppressed more severely, it is hard to grow. And then the Catholics not as active as Protestants in evangelism. That's another factor. The third factor, in the past, the Catholic growth, especially from 1900 to 1950, at that first half of the 20th century, the growth is often by family. Right? If the father, grandfather convert, the whole family become Catholic. And Catholic families tend to have many children. But now that advantage disappeared. All married couples could only have one child. So Catholics or Protestant or atheists, all the same. So lost that advantage. So that another possible factor is Catholic churches have strongholds in rural areas, in villages, and they persist. But the growth happens more so in the urban areas, as far as I can tell. The larger house church congregations, really since 2003, it's like fire really spreading. And those are Protestant churches. And so whether the Catholic theology has already adjusted to this new urban development, that's the issue. Finally, another thing is the divide between underground and above ground church. That's also holding the church back. Because in some regions, in some dioceses, there are 3 dioceses overlapping. So like in Tianjin, for example, there can be 3 bishops claiming the authority of the same place. Why? Because the old dioceses were decided in the 1940s by Vatican. Then since 1949, early 1950s, they cut off the ties with the Vatican, and the China has adjusted the administrative districts so many times. So now the official church in China, all by the official administrative borders. So I'm from Changzhou, Hebei, and Changzhou is a diocese. But the old 1940s diocese is the Xianxian. So there's a bishop of Xianxian. There's a bishop of Changzhou. Both bishops claim the same territory. If you are ordinary Catholic, see them fine. They both are fine people. But which way should I go? I think this internal struggle also hurt the church. Perhaps that's a strongest motivation for the Vatican-China agreement. Trying to reconcile the above-ground, underground church, reduce conflicts, internal conflicts. So that's why the Vatican has repeatedly emphasized this is for pastoral purposes, not for any political reason to reach this agreement.
Are any of the Catholic churches underground, or are they all in the open?
They are underground is quote by quote. It's not really secret. The underground churches simply are those churches under the bishops who refuse to join the China Catholic Patriotic Association. Almost everyone knows they are Catholic, and this is Catholic leader, maybe not recognized as bishop, but at least as a priest. They do things in the open, but they are called underground rather than in any secret. And also more than 2/3 of the above ground official Catholic Church bishops already have become recognized by the Holy See. That is, even though they are above ground, they have no problem with Vatican. So only there were seven bishops that the Chinese government made them bishops. The Vatican refused to recognize them. Now the new agreement is to accept all the seven into the legitimate ecclesiastic system. But there are 30 underground bishops that the Chinese government has not admitted into the official church. That's one of the things to watch, what will happen to these 30 underground bishops, their fate.
Recently I've been rereading French translation of St. Augustine, and when I saw your lecture, it was just a coincidence that the author draws a picture of the climate during that time. And at one point, he talks about the incredible abuses that Augustine had seen executed against the Christian minority, and that was what drove him to the church. And so, with the abuses that are happening in China, and then knowing that it probably increases the Christian growth, do you see the government changing at all in that, even though they see abuses helps the Christian population?
I don't think the communist leaders understand religious dynamics. Right now, there is the new campaign to suppress the churches. Right now, it's still going on in Henan province, in Jiangxi province, in several provinces. The government still come to take down the crosses on rooftops. Some churches totally demolished. A few resistant pastors have been jailed. They haven't learned the lesson from the Cultural Revolution when many people were tortured, but they, the martyr. What's the saying? The martyr is the seed of growth of the church. Blood of martyrs. Yeah, blood of the martyrs. Yes. So even though religious studies has been restored in China for about 4 decades, I was one of them in the 1980s. They still don't get it. Don't get this religious dynamics.
The other, I just want to make 2 other points, is that at that same time, in the late 4th century, Empress Justina had recruited mercenaries into the imperial army, which enabled the barbarians and pagans to enter into the empire peacefully and corrode it from within. So they were everywhere. They were appointed in every strategic post. So do you see that kind of thing happening either in the United States through much more subtle ways, maybe through elections and appointments of non-Christian, so-called, I don't want to use the old term barbarians or they're not mercenaries, but still, do you see that that kind of thing happening where it can corrode something from the inside?
Yeah, I certainly have seen many Christians express that concern. There may be already in their midst, the authorities already have some secret operation. Actually, in the Catholic Patriotic Association and in the Protestant Three Self Patriotic Movement Committee, there are always people saying, "Oh, one of the leaders was actually Communist Party member, in the disguise of a priest or a pastor." Actually, among the Protestants, at least 2 of them were totally exposed. During the Cultural Revolution, a pastor in Shanghai, Li Chuwen, he was a very well recognized pastor. His preaching was very pretty good, very good. Very many people liked his sermons. But when the Red Guards came to called the struggle meetings, he could not take that any longer. He said, "Wait a minute, I'm actually a Communist Party member." So his membership was exposed. So the party had to take him away from the church and put him aside for a couple of years, then gave him a government position. Eventually, Li Chuwen became the representative in Hong Kong, a representative of China, mainland China in Hong Kong. So his history all known in China. So he was a secret party member, Communist Party member. And another one was at CAS, vice president, Zhao Fusan. Zhao Fusan used to be a Christian, a pastor. He was a leader in the Three Self-Patriotic Committee of Beijing Municipality. But in the 1960s, he was recruited to be a researcher in the new Institute of World Religions. And eventually, he became a vice president of CAS, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Then he, you change as a scholar is fine. But then he had meetings for 党内, those internal party operations. He became open as a Communist Party member. But what's interesting is Zhao Fusan left China in 1989 when the student movement, the Tiananmen Square incident happened, when the tanks rolled on Tiananmen Square, and Zhao Fusan, he was visiting either in the US or France. He refused to go back to China. So he was Chu he was removed from CAS. But in his later years, at least a close friend of him in an article said, he reconciled with Christ. He might be a true Communist Party member, but before his death, he became a real Christian. So even those mercenaries, those people mixed into the church, everyone has the possibility of a conversion.
My third...
Can I just, maybe just be quick, see if I have time for one or two more questions from others, so I just want to, go ahead, please.
So you were talking about the growth of Christianity in China when the social structure doesn't change. I'm from Xinjiang province and I'm Catholic, and this summer when I went back home, I realized that they set up the metal detector, and you have to swipe your ID to go in the church, and people who are under 18 years old cannot go to church anymore. And I think that's not only in Xinjiang, I think there's other places as well. With that, and that really concerns me because a year ago it wasn't like this. When I was little, I had played in church, and so would that change your vision of Christianity?
I know that has been happening, and also if it happens in Xinjiang, the technology can be easily transported to other provinces. But in spite of those increased restrictions, I think the growth will continue. Because what happened in the Cultural Revolution, when some priests were actually in jail or in labor camps, you cannot openly say you're a Christian, adults, not only children, but adults. But even in that situation, after the Cultural Revolution, and many people re-emerged as loyal Catholics or loyal Christians. So now, yes, there are the increased persecution, restrictions, we know that. But the level is still quite modest. I'm sorry to say that for those who are, under the persecution. But compared with the Cultural Revolution, right now the measures of persecution is still very modest, very, there are not that many people are jailed for their faith yet. It could happen. I think the persecution could increase, intensify in the coming years. That's very under Emperor he. But I think Christians will survive.
Thanks for giving us the talk. I just wondering, because in China, everything when you come to China, there's a strong effect of the cultural assimilation. So there are lots of people in the rural area believe in Christian, but basically the Christian they believe in is not the same as what we thought. It's like they're believing like a very different Jesus.
Okay.
So do you still count them as Christian or not? Because they believe that they believe in the Jesus, but basically they're not.
Yeah, it's if you were a theologian or priest or pastor, you have your own standards to see who can be considered true Christian, who can be considered not true Christian. First of all, as a sociologist, I don't make that distinction. Second, on the theological level, Christianity is a universal message, but it's in different cultures manifest in different ways. So there's indigenization that happened to Christians in many countries. I spent some time in Italy. I see those Italian Catholics, they do have some things that I don't know they are Christian thing, but more perhaps is really, I know the pagan word, perhaps not so politically correct way to express it, but they do have alternative spiritualities, I put that way. But, they have been Catholics overall for 2,000 years, and you cannot expect Chinese Catholics do the same thing as Italian Catholics do. The Chinese speak Chinese, the Chinese language carries some message that you need to do this hermeneutics. You got to deal with certain ambiguous things. But I'm a Protestant Christian, and for me, the Bible said clearly, as long as you openly admit you follow Christ, you're a Christian. Nothing else. Yeah, you may have additional beliefs or practices, but those are not as essential as accepting Jesus Christ, the sole criteria. Ever since Pope Francis, when he became the Pope, I wrote an article in Chinese and also got onto Voice of America TV interview. I said, I can imagine this Pope could visit Beijing. When the China and Holy See diplomatic relationship reestablished, I think the significance of a visit by Pope Francis to Beijing can be more significant than the visit of Richard Nixon to China in 1972. President Nixon's visit to China changed world politics. But if Pope Francis visits China, that will change world politics, economy, and spirituality. I think he would do anything to do that. So clearly. He has said this so openly, repeatedly, and made actual efforts to do. The current agreement, the Vatican side made so many compromises. It's so clear. And the Chinese side, at least so far, it looks like they have been holding ground, not giving in. But still, the Pope is so positive, so optimistic about the relationship. I think it could happen. I also made a bold prediction. Sorry, sociologists don't talk about the future. We talk about the past. But I think if U.S.-China relations get worse and worse, now we are really at a tipping point. The relationship can get really bad. But the worse the relationship between China and the U.S., perhaps the better chance for the Pope Francis to visit China. If China wants to really stay as part of the world rather than become isolated from the rest of the world. So things are really, many things people may try, may plan politically, economically, but there's something spiritual beyond all the political, economic factors. It's amazing to find what's going on in that realm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.